Salamone, the podcast, presents A Lover's Guide to the Never-Ending Apocalypse, Part 4, World War Women. Welcome to Salamone. I'm Michael Salamone. Now the Sala Show. This is part 4 in our year-end series about the rhythms behind the drums that beat for forever war. I call it A Lover's Guide to the Never-Ending Apocalypse because we celebrate those who live with love, having to now stand up against those who lead with fear and hatred. I swapped the order of installments I had planned for this series after the attack in my state of Colorado at Planned Parenthood last week, when an armed terrorist, a fundamentalist Christian terrorist, I want to be clear on this because nobody in the mainstream media will say it, a white male Christian fundamentalist terrorist, force-fed by lies from the media and Republican presidential candidates alike. He responded by taking a health center by storm and murdering civilians and police officers alike in the name of his radical political agenda. We've got to talk about World War women. Fundamentalists, the Muslim Brotherhood, are burning Christian Coptic churches in Egypt and opposing a UN resolution to end worldwide violence against women. An even further extremist sect of the Muslim religion, a rape cult that we call ISIS or Daesh, is using social media and traditional marketing to recruit lonely, hopeless, mentally ill people into serving their cause, offering up their lives to serve their cause. In America, certain sects of right-wing Christian fundamentalists are burning African American churches. Some are talking about forcing the government to close mosques, and others want to burn, bomb, or shoot up women's health clinics. Not isolated events. It happens all the time. It's been happening my whole life. Social media, traditional news media, and the marketing firms behind these Christian extremists help recruit lonely, hopeless, mentally ill people into serving their cause, into offering up their lives to serve their cause. Terrorism is defined as violence for political purposes. How far will we let America's death cults fester and grow? These different zealots are now demanding war against each other on a worldwide scale. It's the West versus the East. It's the Christians versus the Muslims. These different zealots are now demanding this war on such a large scale, with both having the same end game goal of bringing about the apocalypse. For real, this isn't comic book shit. This is real life. Both religions want to end life on earth to bring about their own ideas of heavenly afterlife. There's a reason that religious texts are usually the best sellers. They're not particularly well written, but they end with a crazy mindfuck. Meanwhile, the Lex Luthors of the world are profiting off of all of it, from selling advertisements to the fear served up live on television, to selling everyone in the fight the weapons they'll need to kill each other. All parties involved, the different religious groups, the media, the corporations who profit from war, they beat the war drums, and they work to manufacture and nurture xenophobia and bigotry, and keep us complacent to their machinations. And we haven't even touched on poverty, the environment, or fascism's effects on this powder keg yet. Not yet in this series. We have to stop this onslaught of enemies to humanity who embrace bigotry or the exploitation of a people, be they at home or abroad. But we need to do that in concert with allies to promote tolerance worldwide. Because to succeed in stopping their annihilationist endgame, we'll need to be building bridges. Tolerance, equality, and social justice must be championed to fight hatred, violence, poverty, and greed. You know, the stuff that people say that their religion's all about. We've got to stand up for what type of humanity we really want right now. Right now. We have to agree on our values worldwide, on human rights, civil and economic human rights and justice for all citizens of the world, tolerance alongside civil and economic justice for all cultures. This is what the good guys want. The bad guys want the freaking end of the world. The apathetic will make the call on how it all goes down. None of us will truly understand anyone else's experience. It's just not possible, because each of us lives in a me-centric universe from which we observe and interact with the world, and we're all different. That's why when discussing social justice issues on this show, I often say things like the intersection of intersectionality, to try and highlight that there's a shared experience that we need to lead from to promote tolerance. But what do I know? I only know my experience. And as someone who believes in social justice, that means I have to seek out a lot of other voices to listen to. The interaction at the intersection is invaluable to me. I'll never know what it's like to be another race, sexual orientation, or gender than what I am. I think that's why I'm drawn to storytellers and activists. They tend to be a diverse yet vocal peoples to learn about other human perspective from. And when you start to pay attention to the issues important to people of other perspectives, you get a better idea of their world view. I've always been interested in the issues. As a kid, there were elements of old school, I like Ike era conservatism that I read about in books that really appealed to me. I was also really interested in several areas of libertarianism, which does still appeal to me on some levels. I would never advocate against free will, except for when it steps on the free will of others. That's what civilized society is about. I came from a small rural New York town, and most of the people I knew were Republicans, other than one half of my family being pretty much what I call party-loyal Democrats. I think in their hearts they're more progressive than the Democratic Party, but they've spent their lives in this Coke versus Pepsi, Republicans versus Democrat war that they're party loyalists before anything. It wasn't until I was 15 that I decided I would become a Democrat, a party affiliation I've stayed with since, but it was at 15 that a group of older girls I was friends with explained the pro-choice movement to me. And they were going to a rally. I tagged along. We met famous musicians and interacted like a big festival. It was kind of a big deal when you're that age. I started listening to women, and I understood that their health care was treated differently than my health care, that their reproductive organs were infringed upon and mine weren't. And that wasn't fair at all. I've always been on board then with the social justice demands that the women's movement has made. I think it's criminal that the world doesn't just work that way. There's no reason that women should have had to wait for the right to vote. And history be damned, there's certainly no reason that in 2015 women still make less than men. No person in America should be afraid of using public transportation or walking in their neighborhood. All of this is logical and should be demanded for by all citizens. But we accept those dangers and discriminations towards women here in America and throughout the world. But why? There's a famous John Lennon song which uses language I don't believe in using that sums up civil rights for women of the world. I used to think that was an activism song, but since learning about John Lennon's private life more, I wonder if he didn't believe that message. I don't know. I don't know his experience. I don't know what it's like to be John Lennon. I certainly don't know what it's like to be a woman. Women all over the world are second or third-class citizens. It's a big part of what we're talking about in this series about lovers trapped in a never-ending apocalypse fueled by extremism, hatred, and greed. ISIS treats women like a cattle commodity, and there are plenty of Muslims who subjugate women. That's no secret. But there are Jewish sects that do that too, and all you need to do is Google up who the Duggars are, like I had to do when the scandals started coming to light, and you'll see how many fundamentalist Christians treat women like livestock too. Josh Duggar was recently accused of raping a porn star. So was MMA fighter, War Machine. A male porn star, James Dean, was recently accused of raping his porn star girlfriends and other actresses. All of the accused or their defenders online are blaming the victim in response, saying that her profession made her immune to rape. How disgusting is that? We live in a society where if women have the same attitude about sex as most men do, they're less human? That's not true. We are all human, even the dehumanized. Devaluing human beings is repulsive. So Bill Cosby is repulsive. And religious fanatics abusing women are repulsive too. Come on. All three of the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, undid all of that other medieval bullshit by saying some form or another of treat others how you want to be treated. Get with the times of over 2,000 years ago already. All of the religions believe in social justice. That's why people started following them. Hope, not fear. But now there are these slivers and just isolated segments, but cults of all three of the major religions that prey on fear and push for violence and hatred. Women are still sold into slavery worldwide, with young girls being stolen into human trafficking rings and sold into prostitution. Women are harassed online so much that 9 out of 10 in a study said they've been sent unsolicited sexually explicit messages online and nude pictures from strange men. Dick pics I'm talking about. Daily. Now, except for some women and men who might be listening who have a certain type of sexual appetite, most of us would be disgusted and disturbed by that happening to us every single day from strangers. But somehow we expect women to act like everything is normal. And that's in the so-called civilized nations. This is why progressives take issues with Hillary Clinton on women's rights. She's had shady political and business dealings with some of the world's worst nations for civil rights for women, or worse, human trafficking. And the Republicans? Well, let's just say civil rights for women isn't a strong point for them either. It's important to our apocalypse theme because this is yet another area where these two enemies, the fundamentalists of the Christian West versus the fundamentalists of Islam, are actually in concert together. One promises terrorists virgins in the afterlife, and here on earth rapes, murders, and destroys villages. The other encourages terrorists to gain favor with God by bombing abortion clinics and supporting politicians who carpet bomb villages. I've always believed that the word feminism means a belief that women are human beings and that all human beings are equal. It shouldn't be a belief. It is fact. All human beings are equal. The laws and the politicians may not treat them that way. The churches certainly don't. But all human beings are equal. Power structure just hasn't caught up to the reality. Women are indeed human beings. More importantly, they're the human beings that make other human beings. But what do I know? I'm just a man who only knows his own experience. So I thought we better talk to a woman this week. We cut now to that conversation. I'm joined this episode by a kind friend, a Denver artist working through a series on world feminism as we speak, Andrea Thurber. Andrea, thank you so much for coming on the show, and please, let's start by you telling us about the series you're working on and the issues you're trying to communicate about.
Well, right now I'm just in a class, really more so than anything else, just working on digital art. So I was kind of given a lot of free rein in terms of the issues that I could deal with, and currently with the state of things going on, you know, the kind of war on Planned Parenthood that's going on currently, I was moved to try and educate people on feminism and kind of the inequalities that are still going on. I'm in class with a lot of women who are about 10 years younger than me, maybe. And so what I'm kind of noticing is that the attitude towards feminism has changed. Some people don't necessarily associate themselves as feminists anymore. A lot of women kind of feel like it's not necessary. And so one of my goals with the series was to kind of deal with topics such as sexuality, gender identity, and then overall kind of political support of reproductive rights.
Why is that? I've noticed that with younger women as well, that they shy away from at least the word feminism, even though they agree with the basic principle that we're all equal human beings. Is that, do you think, maybe a byproduct of conditioning through media and through so many people using it like it's a dirty word?
I do think so. Like, I really do feel like a lot of, when you're a younger woman and you're heterosexual, you definitely want to, like, you want a boyfriend, like, you want to please guys, you want to seem cool. So, like, I think a lot of girls, like, with the media kind of playing this really, like, they're just, they really, really want women to kind of pine for men and lust for men and quest for men, and that's kind of like the basis of it all. And so girls feel like they need to impress men, and so they feel like they're going to alienate men. It's done kind of out of a kindness, really. They don't want men to feel unequal. That's not really the point of it. But what they don't understand is it kind of, by not accepting the term feminism, we're kind of locking ourselves in that position where we're going to consistently be paid less than men, where we're going to constantly have our rights, you know, potentially taken away from us because we're not passionate about the fact that we need to be equal. So kind of how I see it is, you know, whereas with the Black Lives Movement currently, you know, that kind of all lives matter, whatever, retaliation to that, really, really devalues the power of the Black rights movement, which is pushing for equality, because it is a population who's been typically marginalized. And women, it kind of falls into the same category, where if we remove ourselves from the word feminism, we kind of are saying, you know, this group of people who has typically been marginalized are not as important. You know, they are still lumped with the whole, and the inequalities will continue to exist.
And like that all lives matter counter to Black Lives Matter, there's a men's rights movement, at least on Twitter, I don't know how big it really is, that does exactly what you just said. They kind of aim to devalue a feminist movement, saying that somehow they're a victim of it, which of course makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, and I just think it's a sensitivity issue. I mean, when anybody, it's a power thing, you know, if you feel like somebody is attacking you in some way, sometimes you feel like you have to stand up for yourself without kind of looking at the bigger picture and understanding if the inequality really exists. It's kind of a very narrow-minded, immature kind of attitude to take towards it.
Indeed. Now, is it fair to say your work, because it's video-based, at least the stuff I've seen on your website, you could call it performance art?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's performance art that is videotaped. So it is performance for, like, a camera specifically.
I really identified with my culture, Italian Americans, when I watched your piece on sausage making, because I was trying to pinpoint the statements, be it like repression or penile patriarchy or any of the feelings it gave me, but I was really distracted by trying to see what brand of tomato you were using.
Oh man, I'm impressed.
It was Safeway, right?
It was Albertsons. And honestly, like, you know, I would never actually make spaghetti sauce with that, but I wasn't going to, honestly, I was just being cheap. I wasn't going to, you know, make, like, I wasn't going to use, like, San Marzano tomatoes or whatever to ruin, you know, to just, like, pour on the floor. So I went cheap.
So the issue I've been talking about I'm kind of doing a series right now on the show that I, for lack of a better phrase, came up with a lover's guide to the never-ending apocalypse, of just all these really crucial issues coming to a head right now. And I think, and the one I want to talk to you about is very important, especially after what we saw here in Colorado Springs, but also when we do talk about cultures like in the Middle East or even fundamentalist Christians in this country. Is there a worldwide war on women?
You know, it's really, really hard to say. I really feel like a lot of this is perpetuated by the media. I feel like, you know, when you talk to the majority of people, they feel like women's rights should be equal. What really, really, I think, is skewed right now is the way that the GOP is using Planned Parenthood as a political token to pander to uber conservative groups that fundamentally disagree with abortion. And whether or not you agree with, I know a lot of people who are pro-life who, are kind of okay with women having a choice, even though themselves personally are pro-life. And I think that that's the kind of perspective that doesn't necessarily get brought up by the media. I think what we see is the media really, really perpetuating those radical views so people feel like they're more widely held. Mm-hmm. That kind of, when viewed by the wrong people, and combined with kind of an alarmist attitude, is a really dangerous combination. Because I know very, very logical people who, after seeing the highly edited Planned Parenthood videos, were really, really, really upset, and illogically so. Without kind of taking into consideration the fact that they were probably heavily edited. And so I think like any kind of media that's easily circulated like that is really, really impactful and creates an opening for people who may have problems, whether it be with a certain, with just a certain group of people.
I think when I've looked at polling on the issue, you said about how there's plenty of pro-life people who still would advocate for choice. I know that also there's plenty of pro-choice people who are against abortion. They just want to keep it safe and legal.
Exactly. Because I think what people don't realize is that abortions are going to happen whether or not Planned Parenthood exists. By giving women a safe option, they're just protecting lives of women who are in need of a service. And they're going to go to any measure to get it, so why not make it legal and safe? It's just human kindness, really, because you don't know what situation leads a woman to need an abortion. It could be that she's young and didn't know better, in terms of needing protection. Maybe she was raised in a school that was abstinence only and didn't really have any idea that birth control was an option. Maybe you have somebody who was raped. And maybe you just had somebody who just made a mistake and doesn't want their lives to necessarily be dictated by that. Whatever the reason, it's not really anybody's business. Really, what the mission should be is to make sure that every American citizen is as safe as possible. And by providing this service, I think that we are really, really making, we're creating an environment in which women can succeed and have control over their own lives.
I think it's important for our listeners and for Planned Parenthood, because so much in the media doesn't make this clear. It's a very small percentage of services that Planned Parenthood does that actually is around abortion or abortion consulting or any type of abortion service. It's mostly women's health. They do plenty for men's health as well.
Yeah, I was going to say men's health too. Like every time because I go to Planned Parenthood still. Like,
me too.
Yeah, and it's just, I see just as many men in there as women. I see families. It's a very, very positive environment. I know that it was the first place I went after I had been sexually assaulted. So when I think of Planned Parenthood, because that's a scary situation and you really don't know where to go. And knowing that there's a safe place in your neighborhood where it's a non-judgmental environment, you'll get all of the care that you need, it's just a really, really amazing service to the community. And whether that be women or men, like Planned Parenthood's there to not only make sure that you are connected with the resources that you need, you have the testing that you need, it's also offered at an affordable price. So I know, there's been times when I haven't had health insurance where I've still needed to go get checkups and I've been able to go to Planned Parenthood and afford it, which is amazing.
It's an outstanding organization and a shame that they are demonized so much. And after they were attacked in our neighbor city, which at this point in Denver's growth were basically suburbs of each other anyhow.
Oh, yeah, it's getting there.
I've been thinking about how these lies and the propaganda from the leadership on the right were repeated by the terrorists, and then how really it was presidential candidate Carly Fiorina's words But afterwards, she called the terrorist an activist, and it made
I didn't hear that.
My blood boiled. Well, she was disavowing it, but she wouldn't call him a gunman or a terrorist. She kept calling him an activist, and it just raged me.
That's so unfair, and I think that what really bothers me about Carly Fiorina is I feel like while she's speaking her mind and she has her opinion, she's making it really, really hard for women to make progress, and I feel like she's kind of the token woman of the GOP candidate. Like they need to have a woman to justify this, just anti-feminist kind of movement that they've got going on. I don't know, she's just a pawn for the repression of women, which makes me really, really sad.
Yeah, she's at the forefront of spreading lies about basically a health clinic. Yeah, I was going to ask you that actually as a woman, but fuck that, as a person, I think it should piss us all off.
Yeah, right? It's so hypocritical. I mean, especially being who she is and being a businesswoman and, trying to really, really advocate for, the rights of women, doing something that's so counterintuitive to her own gender is just really, really infuriating. And, it's really, really difficult to see these women kind of rally up behind her and think that she's a good representation of, equality. And she's absolutely not. She's just a very, very strong representative of this just unbalanced system. And I don't know if she really believes, I hope she doesn't believe the rhetoric that she's spitting out, because I don't understand as a woman how you can logically hold behind your own gender and be okay with it.
Yeah, I try and believe that about a lot of candidates, be it Carly or Hillary or Ted Cruz or Donald Trump. I think, man, they've got to be smart enough to know this is bullshit that they're feeding us, but they've got this crazy base that they've got to keep on fire. Well, and the whole, especially Democrats versus Republicans, you've got to be pissed at the other one.
Well, and I feel like a lot of it is, I feel like a lot of this whole kind of the craziness of this group that they're pandering to is largely fueled by Fox News itself. It's a group of people who have been fed Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly and whoever else is on that station. I can't even watch it anymore. But I feel like it's a really, really sick, radical cycle that's kind of going on right now. And particularly with this Planned Parenthood, I just really, really don't, and maybe I was too young to see it going on earlier. Has this always been the case? Have they always been this anti-Planned Parenthood? Or I feel like this has just been a resurgence in the past 3 to 4 years.
Well, I think, and I'd have to talk, and I have plenty of friends who do work for the organization that I could get this information, but I don't know. I feel like maybe there was a lull, but I know I learned what abortion was because of the abortion clinic bombings in the late 80s and early 90s. Okay. So it's been around, that's for sure. But mentioning people in the organization that I've talked to, and this is also true for friends and family who work with refugees, they are getting active threats, be it by telephone, email, all the time. Planned Parenthood specifically, though, what we're talking about, which makes me wonder if poor women are just no longer safe to get health care.
To a certain extent, yeah. I feel like that is the case, but it's even going to be, I think this is going to go across economic boundaries, too. Because I know just as growing up in, a upper middle class neighborhood, the girls would still go to Planned Parenthood. Just because, you might be embarrassed to tell your parents, or it's always been just kind of a safe haven for women, really, because largely I do feel like the sexuality of women is demonized. You really, really are expected to, abstain and be chaste and innocent, and we're not really, I think that, of course, this is changing, but I think largely still, like, you know, there's a lot of slut shaming going on. And so I feel like Planned Parenthood's always kind of been that kind of safe haven where you're safe from that kind of judgment. So I think, like, it's a detriment to not only, you know, women with less economic resources, but also, you know, young women, especially, which is really, really sad.
Yeah, I know the first time I went into a Planned Parenthood, I was in college, and it was time to start getting STD tests. And the reason I continue to do that with that fine organization is it is a safe, non-judgmental place. You don't feel as awkward as such an awkward thing is at Planned Parenthood.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because it's weird, especially like for your your first time going in. For me, it wasn't until I was 24 because I'm a huge nerd. But you know, when I needed to go, it was there, and it didn't. The doctors were really, 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 really nice. Like, I've been to private practices, and I prefer going to Planned Parenthood just because of the environment.
I can't help but wonder if, as with so many of the other issues we've discussed and other issues that plague humanity, if the issue here isn't education, if we need to somehow force every American to learn about all the different types of lady cancers, or like the different services that are so imperative that this outreach gives to communities across the country.
Well, I think a large part of it does begin with our sex education program, and we really need to evaluate how we actually talk about sex with youth. I mean, particularly with the internet, I feel like, you know, parents in schools largely can be a little bit nervous talking about this issue, and I feel like, you know, parents rely on the schools a lot, and if the school's curriculum, if the school is in a really conservative, you know, school, if the school's within a conservative school district, that affects the type of sexual education the kids will have. You know, I know for me personally, they taught us both, but, you know, they really, really sold that abstinence. You know, like, the number one way you're not going to get STDs is to abstain, which is true. But, you know, teenagers are teenagers, kids are kids. Like, they're going to be curious, and if you don't teach them healthy sex behaviors, they're not going to know, you know. And I think rolled into that is also, you know, helping understand consent as well. You know, there's so many things that can be positively addressed in sex education, and I think parents also need to take a little bit more accountability with their children and be comfortable talking about sex, and making sure that, you know, people have a healthy attitude towards it. And I think just kind of because I think American society is still really, really rooted in that kind of puritanical notion of just very straight-laced chastity and purity. And, you know, that's not necessarily what human nature is about. So I feel like once we start kind of understanding ourselves a little bit better, we'll be able to tackle women's rights and education a little bit better and be more open to conversations that will help eliminate all of the misconceptions that are going on about organizations like Planned Parenthood.
About 7 years ago, I got to interview Dr. Jocelyn Elders, who was the Surgeon General until Bill Clinton had her resign, because she had talked so blatantly about her experience with sexual education. And, of course, the media got a hold of it and it just became a soundbite of how you should teach your children to masturbate or something like that. But her whole argument was that it's a lifelong educational process, that you start when they're very young, because it's not uncommon for children to have erections or little girls to touch themselves. And you start early explaining the biology of it and being very factual and not getting into the sex stuff. So by the time that the hormones kick in, you've got a good base to build on. And that was her whole scientific and doctorly experience of how it should be treated, but we've ignored it again another 20 years.
I mean, like, and I feel like my parents did a really good job talking to me about sex. You know, like, when I brought home a book on seals in first grade, like, that had a graphic depiction of what sex was in there. my mom sat down and explained to me. Of course, I was young. I didn't really get it. But, like, my mom has done an amazing job of educating me and my sister about, what's appropriate and what's not. And, I was really, really lucky in that situation. But I've talked to people who haven't been as lucky. And, particularly now with the internet, kids can go on there and just, like, see everything. Internet porn is out there, and it's really, really easy to access. And I think that with that being an issue now, I think sex education is even more imperative, especially with, media just shoving sexuality down these kids' throats in order to sell them things. That sounds really terrible.
But true.
But true, yeah.
In the last weeks, there have been several female porn stars coming out saying they were raped by celebrity, for lack of a better word, Johns. Mixed martial arts person, I think his name is War Machine. The Duggar guy who's always in the news for doing something creepy. And then most recently, a male porn star, James Dean, was accused by two of his former girlfriends and several of his former co-stars of rape. And defenders of the accused rapist, either the rapists themselves like War Machine and his attorneys or just people on social media sticking up for them, all use the same argument that, and I want to read this so I get the quote right, that because of her profession as a sex worker, she accepts this as a consequence. Did you catch any of that? And how insane is that?
Oh my God, that's just so nuts. Like, I'm sorry, like, no matter what, no matter what, a woman is never asking for it. I don't care if she's a porn star who's sitting there on the bed naked. Even if you guys were having consensual sex beforehand, you don't have the right to do something to somebody else's body without their permission. Actually, there's a pretty amazing, I don't know. Have you heard of Emma Sukowitz, the performance artist who carried around the mattress?
No.
She actually, I can't remember what university it was at. I want to say it was definitely somewhere on the East Coast. Maybe it was Columbia. But she was actually, raped by one of her friends in her dorm room. And so she carried her mattress around as her senior thesis. She carried her mattress around, I think it was, I want to say even for like the duration of a semester, until the school board would pay attention to her request to remove him from campus. Her follow-up piece was just posted on the internet recently, and where she actually, it's not necessarily a reenactment, but she does kind of a restaging of the actual event that happened.
Wow. And
it's pretty interesting because their sexual encounter starts off as being consensual. But things escalate and she ends up, the act continues on without her consent. And so in that situation, I think, and the same thing kind of goes as it does for those porn stars. If you read the comments on the bottom of that blog, it is so disgusting. Just the things that people feel like they can say to her over the internet is really, 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 really tragic. Just calling her a whore, saying that she's not right, that she's lying. And, I guess that it does happen, like women do lie about it from time to time, but like, honestly, as somebody who's been sexually assaulted, it's not really something that you want to lie about. Like, that's not something that's like fun to talk about.
Right.
It's a very personal issue. It's just nothing that you're going to really make up. And especially in her situation, like reenacting the whole thing and then visually seeing it, it really brings up, like, what I liked about it was it brought up, the subtlety with which a situation switches, the quickness with which a situation switches from being consensual to non-consensual. Mm-hmm. And the clear line that's delineated. So, in terms of like thinking because a woman's in porn that she's asking for it is absolutely asinine. Because rape happens to men too, and they're not asking for it either. It's, children aren't asking to be raped. It's just, rape is an act of aggression. It's an act of power. It's an act of anger. And, nobody's asking for that to take place. And I don't care if it's because you work in pornography, your shirt was low cut, you were walking alone at night. None of that predicates being raped.
Or just harassed. We read these statistics all the time that 9 out of 10 women report that daily they get sexually explicit messages or even images from strangers on the internet. Who would want to deal with that?
Yeah, you can't even online date. Like, just some of the things I've been sent over, like, OkCupid is just absolutely insane. I mean, I've had a lawyer ask me to be his whore mistress prostitute, pretty much. I get, there's constantly, like, I want you to sit on my face, like, just all this stuff. I've never even talked to you, and you're sending me this weird stuff, and then every once in a while I'll respond and be like, oh my God, you're gross. And they'll be like, what, you hate men? Like, it's just, the internet has made harassment even easier, which is really insane because there's so much anonymity to it.
Right.
You don't even know who you're talking to. So, like, it's pretty much untraceable. So, like, this could be a guy with 6 profiles who just goes and acts like an asshole to everybody.
The dehumanizing of women culturally like that makes me able to kind of comprehend why these women that came out against their co-stars or just that were in porn and raped, I get why people have that disgusting attitude, that because they're have the same maybe sexual attitude as most men do, that they've somehow dehumanized themselves. But it still just makes no sense to me that we could treat fellow human beings that way, let alone how could you be sexually attracted to somebody who wasn't into you? I never get that part of it.
I mean, I don't know. People are into all sorts of weird things. So, like, that, where the bottom line for me is drawn is, like, how could you just do that to another human? I just don't, that's what I really, really don't comprehend. I also, where I don't, there's this whole kind of idea that women and men need to have different sexual morals. There's this whole idea that, men are super horny and always into having sex, and there's, this idea that women aren't as into it and, they're more demure. And I really don't feel like I feel like sex is an extremely personal thing. Everybody feels differently about it. Everybody has different levels of, sexual desires or needs. And, to say that, women are dehumanizing themselves by being in porn, suggests that women's value kind of depends on their abstinence from sex. And, women are people just like everybody else. And so, if you're a woman and you want to go into that industry and that's how you want to live your life, I don't see anything wrong with that. But there are obvious inherent risks in the industry that are, that are based on the vulnerable situation in which you're putting yourself.
I want to be clear, and then I want to read some statistics that I wasn't advocating the dehumanization of any person.
Yeah. I gotcha.
And I actually hope in a future show, I know some people in the adult entertainment industry or have been in, and I want to do that show sometime to talk about what they deal with. But I want to read.
I hope you do, because that'd be interesting.
A human being in America is the victim of sexual assault every 2 minutes. A majority of the crimes go unreported, and nearly 40% of the victims are children under 18, which makes me want to segue to something I kind of mentioned earlier, but why I'm currently pissed off at Hillary Clinton now. It's no secret. There's video out there. You can hear the audio yourself. It's uncut. You can make your own judgment that she in Little Rock defended a child rapist who she knew was guilty and got him acquitted by all sorts of things, but like trying to use pardon the vernacular, cum-stained little girl panties and such to intimidate people. And it's a really gross conversation, and you can hear her brag about that. But today, she was saying about sexual assault victims. She was asked, and she said we should always believe the victim first, which is correct. But she was immediately asked about, well, what about the 3 women who came out accusing President Bill Clinton of rape, and that he was then removed from office for perjuring himself on those cases? And she said, well, the victim is always right until they are proven to be liars. But in the cases she was referring to, those women never really were proven to be liars. The president and Mrs. Clinton were proven to be liars. I would just, since you're the first woman I've talked to today on this topic, love to hear a woman's input of how do you have the hubris to even comment? How does it find that?
It's such a difficult situation. You know, before I went to college, I ended up going, I really thought I wanted to go to law school when I first went to college. So one of my dad's friends is a judge, and I sat down with him, and I was like, I think I really want to be a judge one day. I really want to, help better society, and I think I could do that as a judge. And he's like, well, you realize you have to be a lawyer first. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, and I was like, yeah, I'm okay with that. I can do that. And he said, you realize, Andrea, that 75% of the people that you're going to defend at least are guilty. He said, you're going to have to take cases that you disagree with, and you're going to have to defend them. And you're going to have to do everything in your power to make them win because it is their right to a fair trial. And I'm not necessarily completely defending Hillary in that situation in terms of the case. I think bragging about it's weird. But I do think that, and particularly like as a woman, as a professional woman, and I think, was that in the 70s that she was a lawyer?
I believe the case was in the 70s. I mean, technically she's still a lawyer.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that, she's a power-hungry woman. That girl wants power. And so she's going to do everything in her capability to make it happen. And if that, potentially means taking a case that she doesn't agree with, that means taking a case that she doesn't agree with. And while I, hate that the guy was not convicted, that's a failure of our justice system as a whole and not just Hillary Clinton. I think her defense of Bill's potential rape victims is pretty, that's a difficult, I feel bad for her in that kind of PR situation because I would hope that inside she would really, really want to prosecute them. If I were in Hillary's situation, I would have left Bill eons ago because if somebody cheated on me, I would be done.
Right.
So that's where my larger, Hillary is just clearly in this for Hillary. Which, I know women in the business world like that. And, it's a byproduct of having to fight that hard to be where you are. So to a certain extent, I have a hard time slighting women in power who've had to do questionable things to get there because there are also men who in that situation have to do the same thing and less attention is called to it and less, emphasis is put on it just because there are more men in power. There are fewer women in power, so if they do shady things to have to get there, there's like a bigger emphasis on that. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense, and it segues well into an issue that we agree with all the Democratic candidates, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and even Martin O'Malley on. But out of all the other women's issues, pay inequality is like a cherry on top. Like, here, you're shit on in all these other ways. Why don't we pay you less too? And I think what pisses me off most about the issue is what you were just talking about. I've mostly had female bosses since getting working papers as a kid 25 years ago and starting to work. And my experience has always been that working for women who thus were the highest paid in those organizations. So if statistically women make 75 cents on the dollar to a man, how shitty must it be everywhere else in the country that my experience is that I'm working for the top pay earner and she's a woman? But my experience is exactly what you talked about. There have been some who were just wonderful people, and others that had been driven mad by the strive for power.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I don't, a lot of those women, I don't necessarily slight them at all because, it's hard working for them. And it's difficult, being a woman, because for me, I just can't treat people like that. I'm not that type of person, which is why I went into the art world instead of the business world. I'm not that kind of person who's capable of doing that, so I don't necessarily understand that ideology, but I understand how difficult it is in that world to succeed. Because, in the nonprofit world, it's a majority, there's a lot of ladies in that field. And, so if you're the one guy who's in that field, it's a lot easier for you to get hired and they usually pay you more. And I think by and large, women have, still to this day, women are seen as emotional and as dramatic and, illogical. And so sometimes, even to this day, men are seen as, the calm voice of reason. And it's a lot harder as a woman to to gain that respect and, be taken seriously. So I don't necessarily, I don't enjoy working for them, and I wish that they would behave differently, but I understand where that behavior comes from.
And that's another behavior that I think could be corrected through education and policy, and I think that starts with the ERA, with the Equal Rights Amendment, demanding equal pay. And I don't think that's just for women. I think we should be including the LGBTQ community in that, make it a blanket statement that all humans in America are employed under the same set of laws and treated the same via pay, via workers' comp, via their families or their spouses' rights, etc.
Absolutely. I feel like our country really needs to work on removing this concept of otherness that's created, and realizing, we are all human beings, regardless of religion, race, gender, at the bottom, we're all people. And if we learn how to treat each other better, and if we treat each other as equals, we're going to see a removal of a lot of these problems that, are plaguing us right now.
Yeah, so many of the topics we're talking about on this series, at least, it all boils down to tolerance and equality, which are intrinsically American values.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one thing that we as Americans forget about is empathy. And I don't know if this is, again, this is just in my personal experience. I feel like a lot of people don't connect with each other and really think about putting themselves in another person's shoes. And if you stop for a second and take a moment out of your life to, just think about when you're having an interpersonal, interaction with somebody else, just thinking about how they feel for a minute, whether that be walking down the street and seeing a person who doesn't have a house and thinking about how cold they must be, or, walking, into a grocery store and watching somebody compare two cans of food and wondering which one to buy and thinking about how hungry they might be. It's just people, or seeing somebody who's just looking upset on the street and, wondering what in their day made their life so hard and made them feel that way. I don't think we take enough time for those kind of little moments to, just wonder what's going on in the lives of our fellow humans. We're so self-consumed, so absorbed with this idea of, particularly now with things like Facebook, other people liking us. We want to be liked. It's very much about us, and we don't really think about other people as much anymore, I don't think. So I think that, really teaching kids empathy and understanding and trying to maintain this humanness and understanding, attachments to other people would really, really help with being able to institute these policies of equality.
Amen. The final topic that I wanted to bridge, which I didn't originally have in my notes, but a friend of mine on the Facebook today is a new mother and was complaining about how she's supposed to live on the short-term disability, which she's given for 12 weeks and maxed out at $170 a week. And this is another area that the Democratic candidates tend to agree on, is that we need a better family leave system. And I looked it up today. The countries without paid maternity leave are Swaziland, Lesotho, Papua New Guinea, and the United States of America. Family values my ass. What's wrong with us that we can't take care of new parents, man and woman, after the birth of a child? And isn't that part of this struggle of what it's like to be a woman in America?
I think it's so funny, in terms of the United States and what we're willing to sacrifice to pretend we're not socialists, or communists as they'd like to call it. I mean, we're so fiercely attached to this idea that somehow evolving to we're already a democratic socialist nation, somehow embracing that is going to make things worse, and we're going to lose our freedom, and we're not going to be able to do anything anymore, which is just it's really, really detrimental as a whole. I think we're still kind of rooted in this idea here that women are supposed to be at home raising the kids, but right now our economy is so bad, both parents have to be there to work anyway. There's no way you can, unless you're a lawyer or a doctor, it's very, very difficult to live on one income. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely, still kind of, it's a reflection of exactly how out of touch our politicians are currently. Not all of them, obviously. We're starting to see, this progressive movement with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren is just such a beautiful thing.
Amen.
Just in terms of speaking logically to people, in helping evolve our country towards an economic system that's going to be more functional in the long run. Right now, the economic policies put forth are clearly not working. And I think that this pay leave is definitely a reflection of that.
Again, I don't know how to say it other than we have to value all humans, and we have to value women who make other humans.
And absolutely. Well, and I think that this goes into, I really feel like there should be fatherhood leave, too. It is just as important for a child to have as a father as a mother. Or, two fathers or two mothers. It's important for a child to have two parents.
Yes.
It's important for both of those parents to have leave. So I really feel like, and again, in this whole kind of situation of, becoming detached from our patriarchal roots, there's some men out there who love being stay-at-home dads. Mm-hmm. I think that, it's really, really important that both men and women be able to enjoy spending time with their children. And I think that, just giving women leave is saying that men don't care about their kids as much. So I really feel like it goes both ways. I think both parents deserve an opportunity to spend with their child.
Oh, yeah. To borrow from part of Bernie Sanders' stump speech that he gives every day now, probably, that it's such an integral part of the development of a child to have that bonding experience with both the mother and father. And that's why every other industrialized nation gives family leave to both the mother and father.
It really just is so crazy to me how afraid we are of becoming an awesome country like Sweden. Europe's got a lot of good things going on right now too. I think that we're so fiercely independent in this. We're so afraid of being like other nations or kind of succeeding or, giving up our power as, I can't remember. There was some guy in my class who phrased it in a really offensive way. It was something like the world's savior or something like that. Like, that's just so not the world's greatest superpower. That was what it was. And I don't know, that's just such an offensive notion. Like, I think, like, our generation is really, really open to the idea that America is part of the world, and that we're not necessarily a country greater or less than any other country. And I think that that's an attitude we need to start taking. You know, we're a nation just like everybody else.
Well, thankfully, as Americans are polled on the issues like family health care leave or any of the others, including even the ERA that we discussed, a majority of Americans are in favor of the same positions we've taken on these issues. Unfortunately, we have the people who have the most to lose are in the power structure and in the ownership of things like the media. So I think the spin is different than the reality of what's in Americans' hearts.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that. You know, saying that, you know, the majority of the nation supports equality is not good news, I guess. It's not really exciting, like, rhetoric, like, which is really, really sad, because again, like, our media's like, those media companies are trying to generate revenue. They're companies. They're money-making companies. So if their stories aren't selling, if their stories aren't exciting, if their stories don't scare people or upset people, there's no reason to have them for them. And I mean, that's just not really what the point of the news is supposed to be. It really should be about sharing the truth.
Luckily, we live in an age where there's plenty of independent journalism and online activism to take part in. Andrea, I can't thank you enough for what's been a fantastic conversation. I always like to offer up a last word, though, if you have something you'd like to get in that we didn't talk about.
I had a great time talking to you. It's been really, really wonderful. I want to encourage people to keep using the word feminist, men and women. Just think about equality. You know, and I want everybody to, if I could share one message through my art, it would be to treat everybody equally, treat everybody with kindness, and remember empathy.
Wonderful. My thanks to artist Andrea Thurber for having this conversation with me tonight, as well as to everyone who's tuned into the show. We've got just a couple more installments to go with this Lover's Guide to the Never-Ending Apocalypse, examining the rhythms behind the beating war drums. Next week, we'll wrap up the discussion on the elements at play in this crisis, and then in 2 weeks, we'll talk about empathy and hope and love and how we can change course. So I hope you'll tune back in or check out the archives at michaelsalamone.com, iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app. Until next time, I'm Michael Salamone, and reminding you to please be good to each other. Cheers. Salamone is a podcast taped live for a streaming internet audience. Find episodes and archives on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all of the places you get podcasts these days, and of course at michaelsalamone.com. I really think you should subscribe.